any emotion to any tool other than tools that help me solve problems. So that could be any plugin at any time, really. I will say this, though. A lot of people these days are recording with, interfaces, or the preamps are in their interfaces. Yeah. And so there is an analog component to it, but it's not the same as an analog preamp. They're modeling. It's a model, they're modeling distortion on those things. So as a result, a lot of interface preamps don't actually offer a lot of distortion. And when I say distortion, everybody thinks, really obvious audible distortion. Not all distortion is obvious or audible. I mean, it is audible, but, you have to be trained to hear it. So, there is slight amounts of distortion that a good preamp adds. In fact, that's what I would argue is what makes one preamp more valuable than another. In many cases is how they distort. Yeah. The Neve 1073 is outrageously expensive. I wouldn't pay that kind of money for a 1073, even though I could probably say with confidence it's probably the greatest preamp ever invented. But it's so expensive because of the way it distorts. When I crank that gain up, if I have a tom, I can make that tom do just the most amazing sing with the distortion from a 1073. So because so many people are recording without distortion, it becomes important to impart distortion. Yeah. And so the one tool that I use more than anything else these days to deal with this is the Decapitator by Sound Toys. It's the best sounding distortion on the market that I've heard. This is a 9-year-old product, so there may be other products that have caught up at this point, but that changed the game when Sound Toys, when Ken came out with that plugin. And Logic's got a good distortion plugin, but it's not quite like this. That Decapitator is especially on low-end instruments, and distortion generally reacts better to low-end, but on low-end instruments, the Decapitator is just the best. You will frequently find it on my kick drums. You wouldn't know it by listening to a mix necessarily. Some you would, others you won't. Just because I put the decap on there doesn't mean I'm distorting the shit out of it. Yeah. But I am distorting it.
Are you using the mix knob?
I do use the mix knob. So sometimes I'll distort a lot. I'll punish it and then bring the mix knob way down. Sometimes I'll just add just the tiniest bit of distortion and keep the mix knob all the way up. Sometimes, a lot of times I love that the thump on that Sound Toys because it adds this extra low end thump to your signal. So, it's probably the best bass amp plugin out there right now that I've used anyway. Yeah. I mean, I put that thing on, I swear to God, it sounds like I've just plugged in an SVT. And that may sound ridiculous, but I'm telling you, that's my reaction when I do it. I'm just like, I don't even know why I would even want to bring in one of those refrigerators again. The SVT Ampeg combo. Yeah. So, yeah, the Decapitator distortion, that entire Sound Toys plugin line is completely useful. Yeah. Everything he makes is there's probably 8 or 9 plugins that in that package that I rarely use, but when I use them, they fix things. That Filter Freak, if you get a really horrible, horrible kick drum, the worst kick drum you ever got, I don't care what it is. It could sound like, you know what I mean? Like a little fart. And I could put that thing into Filter Freak and make it sound like a legit kick drum. I have no idea, and I don't know how. I don't even know. I couldn't tell you how I do it. I just turn the knobs. Yeah. But that thing is just crazy for fixing fucked up shit.
That's awesome. So do you do anything specifically in your productions that you think gives you a trademark sound?
Well, for the longest time, I was mixing with more low end than anybody else. That's not the case anymore. Everybody finally caught up to me.
Thank goodness.
In 1997... Yeah, exactly. And there's a reason for that. I came in young in the 90s and I'm like, fuck this. I want low end on rock music. And the big rock mixers who had been mixing for 20 years were like, fuck this. I'm not changing the way I mix just because we changed formats. So I'm highly paid. The labels love what I do. I'm going to keep mixing the way I do with no low end. And so there was this transition. And then you would think that it would only have taken 10 years for people to bring low end into their music. But then what happened is we had the loudness wars. And that also affects the low end, because the louder you want to make something, the more the low end distorts. So you got to kind of remove low end when you want to make something loud.
Right.
So now that the loudness wars are over, it took, 25 to 30 years between the true end of vinyl to finally get the low end curves, full range mixing.
Yeah.
And then the crazy part is, you got Beats and all of these and Bose and all these guys that add all this low end to their consumer products.
Right.
But we're mixing full range now. We don't need the extra low end anymore.
Yeah. Just sounds muddy.
Unless you're listening to 80s music.
Yeah.
So at some point, you listen to 80s music on some of those overly hyped headphones and things, right? And it sounds great. It's like, oh, wow, listen to all that low end. But that low end's not there. It's all hyped bullshit, right?
Yeah.
It's all added after the fact. So the hyped low end stuff works phenomenal for the 80s stuff. Sounds fantastic. But then everything else it's just like you're crushing the system. It can't even take the low end because it's just too much low end. It just brings everything to the knee. You get to the chorus and it inverts because there's so much low end coming in the chorus that the speaker can't handle it and it turns down.
Oh, yeah.
So, it took a long time for people to finally catch on that you can mix with low end. And it makes mixing more enjoyable. It makes it funner, but it's also can be more difficult, especially with rock music, because rock music is denser. And the denser the music, the less low end you can get away with.
The less room there is, period, right?
Less room there is, period. And where's the first place you're going to lose room? In the bottom.
Yeah.
So, some sparse arrangements, I have so much room for low end. Not all arrangements should be sparse, but I definitely think that you should consider let me put it this way. If you're mixing your a song or your production or whatever, and you're finding that you can't get the low end you want, you probably have too much shit.
Yeah. I like that. Wise words for the listeners.
So, I'm always everything in my productions has a purpose. Every now and then I'll be mixing something. Someone will say, oh, that's designed to be, you shouldn't even hear that. I'm like, well, then it's not going to be in the mix. Oh, no. It adds a vibe. No, it doesn't. It adds noise.
Yeah.
All you do is add noise.
You're masking.
Now, mixing with a producer is not a controversial relationship. If someone really wants that, fine. But I am going to point out to them that they're doing is taking up space, and I will demonstrate to them, just how taking up that space is some negative. So don't take up space just to take up space. Everything in your arrangement should have a purpose. It should fill a frequency range. It should fill a rhythmic purpose. Not all things fill all purposes. It can fill a rhythmic purpose, a frequency purpose. It could fill a melodic purpose, harmonic. It could be a counter melody, but it has a function. And a lot of times when I'm thinking about what I'm doing in an arrangement, I'm thinking about more than one function. Like, okay, let's lay down a rhythmic part for this section, but we got a glut. If we do like a really high rhythmic part, we're playing it and we can't hear it. And we realize, because we got all this high-end information packed up there, so let's find a spot for this. Let's bring the voicings down and find the frequency range where this thing really wants to live and where it does good things for our arrangement. Yeah. Not just rhythmically, but frequency-wise too. And when you think about things like this, and this is the thing that I go about in the book, this is what I talk about in Musician's Survival Guide to a Killer Record. Is
And this is your latest book, by the way.
My latest book, which is building a record and making sure you consider what every part is for and considering its frequency as well as its other functions, musical functions within your arrangement.
Yeah. So let's get into your latest book a little bit, The Musician's Survival Guide to a Killer Record. Can you tell us about the inspiration behind the book and what it's trying to accomplish?
Yeah, well, the inspiration is simple. I mean, I go online and I go on these audio forums that used to be populated by engineers and producers mostly, but now they're mostly populated by musicians and asking questions about recording because musicians are recording themselves these days because microphones are cheaper. You can have a whole studio in a box, all you need is a room. So I just would read all this stuff and I'd read a lot of mythology. For example, just about every other day, I'll read a post about someone who gets his guitars big and fat by recording one, panning it to the left, copying it to another track, and panning it to the right. You chuckle. You chuckle because you know exactly where that guitar is going to sound.
Yeah.
Where?
In the middle.
In the middle. Yet, every other day, there's a post that someone does this. Now, I understand there's people in the world that don't know anything and are going to post things like that. That's fine. What's crazy is the 150 comments afterwards that go, yeah, I do the same thing. And then what's even crazier is when someone says, guys, that doesn't make it fatter, that puts the guitar in the middle, you get attacked for being negative. It's nuts. So, they're not serious, obviously. But if you're a musician and you're serious, this book can help you. Musician's Survival Guide to a Killer Record. And the reason it can help you is because I break down the technical down to its most basic form, down to the things that you need to understand in order to make decisions. And that's it. So it doesn't matter what gear you have. It doesn't matter what microphones you have. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. All that matters is I will give you a prescription on A, how to arrange, which is your most important weapon. Mm-hmm. B, how to simplify the process, and that requires discipline. And so we talk about discipline, and we talk about trusting yourself. I'm talking about a lot of the things I talk about in other books, but I am getting rid of all the information that you don't need to worry about. At one point in the book, I actually sit down the reader. I say, go to your DAW, sit down, and I go through and I have them put a guitar part, and then I have them double the guitar part so they can hear it on the left and the right. And then I have them do a copy of it so they can hear it in the center. And then we start to mess with phase relationships and phase coherency so that you can understand what it sounds like when your microphones aren't coherent. At which point we just had a bunch of musicians go, what does coherent mean? What does he mean by that? This is exactly what I'm talking about. It almost doesn't matter. In fact, I explained to you how to record stereo, the easiest ways to record stereo, but I recommend that you don't record stereo. If you're a musician, stay in your lane. Stereo recording is not going to make it better. Now, so what you say, well, the drums sound better when they're bigger. Okay, great. But why are you going to record the drums at your home studio? Unless you've got a sizable room or, have decent ceilings or have a bunch of microphones and mic pre's, you need a lot of equipment to record drums properly.
Yeah.
And you need space. So I recommend, listen, there's times you want to go to the studio. You just need to know when. That's all. And I explain when and how to use all that and how to make a record so that you can, whatever you've got available to you, art is made with the resources available to you. I explain how you do it.
I love it. Yeah, I definitely found the book eye-opening and wish it was available when I was getting started probably, 10 years ago.
A lot of people tell me that. I wish I had it available when I was starting.
Yeah. If only we could go back in time. But
some things just take 30 years to learn. That's all.
That's right. I mean, I don't know about anything about 30 years, I guess, other than walking. Talking, maybe. Yeah. But
well, you're doing good at it.
Thank you.
You're an exceptional talker. I can tell you've been doing it a while.
Yes, thank you. I learned from the best. So is there anything in the book in particular that you'd like to share maybe with our audience just to give a sneak peek other than what you mentioned?
I think I gave it to you. I think that the listening experiments in there are probably the most illuminating for people.
Yeah, it's out of the box for sure. Speaking of out of the box, I know you've been pretty outspoken in the past about your use of hybrid mixing using a summing box, and you've just already mentioned on the podcast today that your setup. Is that something that you think a beginner should worry about? Or
no, not a beginner. A beginner should worry about recording. Record whatever you can, however you can, the best way that you can, whatever that is. I mean, what are you going to do? You going to drop $250,000 tomorrow to build and build a studio?
Yeah.
No. So just use what you got. The first thing you got to do is make something, and then you'll figure out, go from there. You know what I mean? But Then start begging, borrowing, and stealing. Then start meeting people and going and saying, hey, I did this. You want to add something to it? And then people will add terrible things, and then you won't work with those people, and you'll